story. I guess I'll just start sharing. If anyone wants to interrupt or ask questions along the way, feel free. I didn't get to come last week for the forum, so I didn't get to see a model. But and then afterwards, if anyone has any personal connections to anything I share, experiencing something similar or something like that, it would be great to hear too, since part of this is about forming connections. Okay. I know. Use the boards when they're good. I kind of see Carly. Okay. So I actually grew up around here, very close to here, around Rand and Thomas, if you're familiar with that area. And I was raised Greek Orthodox. And I would say that probably, from a young age, like many kids, you don't think about God all that much, but you're sort of spiritual and you go along with, Sunday school or with whatever you're, raised in your background. And I do think that I had some spiritual tendencies from a young age. I was involved in elementary school in the Awana program, if any of you have heard of that. I had a friend invite me to take part in that, and that was a lot of fun. And that was more, maybe not.
We'll cut that part out.
Okay. Let's see. And that was a lot of just, friendship and spending time with your friends, but at the same time, you are kind of singing praise songs and you're memorizing passages from the Bible. So, I think back that could have had even maybe a subconscious influence in my formative years. And then I think the real, catalyst for me becoming more involved in my Christian faith was in high school. When I was a freshman in high school, I was going to either our Sunday school after church, or it was the youth group when our youth pastor at my Greek Orthodox church, St. Peter and Paul, talked to the high school kids about the importance of reading scripture on your own. And that really, at the time, just struck a chord with me. And I was like, yeah, that does sound like a logical idea. If I'm a Christian and I'm trying to get closer to God, that I would start reading the Bible. So on my own, I just started reading about a chapter a day before I went to sleep. And that it really actually had a very profound effect on me, because reading the gospel stories for myself, and then moving on to some of the other books, I was really emotionally moved by the wisdom of Jesus' words and the apostles' words, and I was moved by some of the other, wise passages and other chapters, and all that. And, high school, of course, same with college, and sometimes your early adult years are very, formative. You're searching things out. You're trying to find your passions. So as I was moved by the scripture, I started then embracing, trying to join other groups where I could learn more about the Bible and be in fellowship with other students my age. So I was involved in high school Bible study. I was involved in a non-denominational Christian youth group. I was very, very much involved in this. It was a real regular part of my life. And I think, looking back on this, there was a positive to this, and there was at least a temporary, kind of negative. And the positive was, especially in high school, it's great to be involved with other kids who are ethically minded, who are trying to lead godly lives. It's a time where you can easily get into trouble, depending on who your peer group is. And I was in a really great peer group. A lot of people who were genuinely seeking out leading Christian lives, and who really loved Jesus and wanted to pursue a Christian lifestyle. On the negative side of that, because I was involved with so many people from different backgrounds, and people were so passionate about pursuing this, I also was running into a lot of people who were on the more extreme end of the way that you can interpret Christianity in the Bible. So I had, friends who, and adult peers as well, who were involved in the youth group, who saw the idea of evolution as a threat to their faith. Now, on my Orthodox side, of course, that there's no conflict there. But, in some of my other peer groups there was. There was the issue of, homosexuality being a sin that you shouldn't pursue, that was very, active in some groups. And so there was that whole, what I like to call the legalistic side of things. And I had to try to navigate that, and I never lost the side of myself that was very much coming from a place of love. But I did have a hard time reconciling, certain aspects of the non-denominational Protestant groups that I was coming into contact with other tendencies that I had, and with other aspects of the scripture, where Jesus talked about it not being our business to judge, like leave judgment to God and the love and all this. So I went on to college, and I was involved in some youth groups and collegiate youth groups there. And at the same time, I'm expanding my circle of friends and family and everything like that. And I think I came to a point in between serious dating relationships where I was just like, I'm at this crossroads in my life, and I don't know where I want to go with this. Like, on one hand, I have, these circle of friends, and I'm a very faithful person, but I feel like, to pursue this faith, I also was starting to feel like I couldn't figure out, I couldn't navigate, how do I be a Christian of faith and not embrace all the beliefs that I was getting from some of my friends who were on the more extreme side of interpreting the Bible and things like that. And so, at that point, I just kind of let go, and for many years I actually stopped going to church, and I stopped reading the Bible, and I was just kind of floating, if I look, back on it. And I asked myself, well, do I want to pursue a different religion? Is that, I'm still a spiritual person, I still feel this calling, what do I do? And when I felt like I looked at other religions, there were things that didn't strike me, I didn't wholly believe everything. So I was like, well, I don't think I can convert to something that I don't fully believe in. So I just kind of sort of kept floating. And then, so then I met my husband. We started, at the time we started dating. And there were kind of two things I think that came together at the same time. One was that, we were going to get married in the Orthodox Church. And you have to go to, some premarital seminars and things like that. And so, I really liked the priest that was now at the childhood parish that I'd grown up at. A lot of people had a lot of respect for him. And so I felt myself having this call to go back to church. And I also felt myself, that I'd always wanted to have that relationship with God from my earlier years. But I still was just like, I'd had so much contact with sort of the side of Christianity that while it was very loving and had, very good intentions, also had this very judgmental side to it. And I still had this question mark of how do I navigate this? So, first I started, there was the involvement with getting married and the relationship back with the Orthodox Church and our parish priest there, who actually was very moderate, and he was a really good role model. And then on the other side, and we can laugh about this a little bit. So if you know this TV minister, and you're like, really? You could laugh about it, or maybe you're going to be like, oh yeah, that guy's awesome. I don't know, but I somehow randomly came in contact with some of the sermons. I don't even remember how now, but of Joel Osteen, who's like this really sunny, bright, if you know of him. Pastor, yes, huge smile. And I have to say, and so I started getting the podcast of his sermons that I could listen to on the way to work. And I think I got a book by, okay, here's what it was. Now I remember. I didn't even remember this before coming in now. So it was podcasts from him that I somehow came in contact with, started listening to on the way to work, and a Catholic Jesuit, who's really, I forget his name right now. Someone might know him. He's technically the official Colbert pastor or something like that. He comes in and he did an interview on that show, and he was very much his interview because he had a book coming out at the time. I can't remember the name of the book. I can look it up later if anyone wants it. But it was very much, about loving, other people and how you navigate issues of faith, and it was really, just intelligent and loving at the same time. And so, where the Joel Osteen sermons factor in is that if you've heard his messages, he does not really come from, a biblical background where their church has a history, or, where he's real schooled in theology. But he's a very loving person, and he's very focused on the positive side of one's relationship with God. And so I was listening to it, and I was like, this is like what, so I felt like, again, I could have a relationship with God that was based on love and find other community, and that was based on these positive things and wasn't focused on judgment and wasn't focused on, the exclusivity. This real fear of like, who's not in our Christian circle yet and who we need to get in, that I always felt was on the periphery of some of the other groups I'd encountered and that I had real problems with. And at this stage in my life too, I think instinctually I had never really had problems with someone who was homosexual. But then when I got involved in some of these groups, I was like, well, should they be abstaining from their lifestyle? And that was real problematic. And then, going to school, you learn about science and everything like that, and you're like, okay, this just doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense that if there's a genetic predisposition that God would be judging them and telling them. So I was like, okay, I can't, deal with that. So suddenly, in my new pursuit of these things, like that just wasn't an issue. And so I was going to my Orthodox church more, and my husband and I got married there. And then after about a year or two, that pastor left. He got switched with a new person who seemed very nice. But, I was mostly going to church with my mother. And so some of this is of course this is a nuts and bolts side of my move. The nuts and bolts was that it was getting really tiresome at times to drive a half hour to church when I was driving all week for work. And I was like, I need a church that can be nearby sometimes to go to. And that's when I started kind of questioning the fuller scope of my faith. I was like, the Orthodox Church, priests can be married, they have families, but it's still just men who can be priests, men who can be serving like on the altar, and including like there are no altar girls. And even though I know that our former priest and many Orthodox priests are very, open-minded and sympathetic about the homosexual issue, some are not, and that church in its official stance is not going to change probably for decades, if not longer, because it is so massive and includes so many countries, and to get that many people higher up, and it's very similar to the Catholic Church, to change is very difficult. And I said to myself, okay, I'm really interested in continuing to grow my relationship with God, but I am tired of I'm just fatigued of dealing with the men and women issue and the argument that like, oh, well, these are separate roles, but we're really all equal. And I'm tired of, not just being open and honest about, really great people who happen to be gay and who are Christians even. I'm tired of that. So I was on the internet trying to be like, what denominations have I heard of that are like about these things? So it was like Presbyterian, Episcopalian. So I have to say, so there were a couple things then that led me finally to the Episcopal Church. One was when I went to the website. If you go to the national website for the Episcopal Church, it's I don't think it's on like the homepage, but it's extremely easy to find the statements that are basically like, endorsing full equality and not being judgmental about, and full equality for even if you're of, a gay orientation. And I really liked that a lot. And then the other thing is, coming from my Orthodox background, I actually do really value, that there is a historical tradition to the church. And I go back to my high school days that I spoke about, where I was involved in a lot of very energetic, fun, passionate groups, but that were non-denominational. I think going through several years of exploring different areas, I think that for me at least, the way I look back on this is that the one danger, I think, of not having a history to your church and not having a kind of, board or structure for making decisions is that you can end up with anyone just kind of walking in and saying, well, this is my interpretation of the Bible right now in the 20th century, and this is the way that Jesus must have meant it, because that's the way the English translation says it. And I'm not going to look at any historical background of when it was written or what the situation was at the time. And I think that is very easy to happen when you're at a church that doesn't have any historical record and hasn't had people wrestling for years with issues and looking at it from an intellectual perspective as well as, a heartfelt perspective. And so the Episcopal Church has that, and then there are a lot of parallels to Orthodoxy. So a lot of the things that I appreciate in my Orthodox background are still in the Episcopal Church. But I feel like it has also been able to be much more contemporary and maybe not contemporary. I mean, we look at it as contemporary now because in contemporary American society, men and women are equal, and our culture as a whole is becoming much more open-minded about orientation. However, in the early days of the church too, I think that there's a lot of historical record of men and women sharing a certain amount of equality, and I think that is something that maybe was more natural to Jesus' intentions that got lost over the years. So
In 325.
in 325, I love that history. So that's why I love having a history course on that. You'll be telling me more about that. So that's it pretty much. And now I'm here, and I'm really happy to be here.
So what other churches did you visit?
I pretty much just, here's a funny anecdotal story. I visited the Presbyterian church that's down, what is it? It's not, is it Dryden?
Central.
Yeah, right. I visited that
Southminster.
church, Southminster, yeah, which is very nice. And then I think I had an issue when I went on the Presbyterian website with that they're still wrestling with the fact that they were originated on predestination and something like that. And I was just like,
Streak of Calvin.
I totally recognize that was part of what their church was founded on. So how do you get away? But I was like, I don't know about that. And then it was funny because I pretty much could have. I pretty much knew this as soon as this person was saying this to me. I was like, yeah, I doubt that's going to work. But I went on the website anyways. So I met someone there that was very encouraging of oh, it's great to have you here, explore other churches too. And named one of the big Bible churches because it was very popular. And I was like, highly doubtful because my whole background in high school was interacting in those groups. But I'm like, well, I'm not going to try and be closed-minded. I'm going to go on their website. And it took a while, but after hunting through the pages where it was where they finally wrote down their creed, somewhere buried in there was the oh yeah, and men and women are equal except women can't hold the very highest position in the church because of this verse in 1 Timothy or whichever book it was. And I was like, are you kidding me? I've told my mother, and I know there's a couple other contemporary churches in our area, and I told my mom, I was like, look, it's bad enough that the Orthodox and the Catholic churches have this background, but at least they have the excuse that it's been this way for hundreds of years. So I have no sympathy for a church that was formed in the last 100 years having a dispute.
That's a great quote.
Yeah.
That's an awesome quote.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I just admire your energy spent and trying to find where you wanted to be.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, well, and you know, I think.
And you're a busy
Yeah.
girl. You're
I-
not sitting home just
Yeah.
thinking about these things.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
How would you like to be a recruiter for us?
Yeah,
How was it to join the choir?
that's right. That's girl.
Come talk to me as previous recruits, maybe.
I connected with a couple of things that you mentioned. I was raised in the Episcopal Church, but that era in the wilderness resonated with me. When I was
Yeah.
I grew up I came of age in the 60s, and there was a lot of political turmoil around the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement and so forth. And I was mad at my local parish because, you know, they were a little too conservative for me, and they didn't want to talk about how wrong the Vietnam War was. And so I was alienated from the church. In the church also, there were some Anglicans who were complicit in apartheid in South Africa. So I had a lot of political issues with the Episcopal Church. And so I got mad and walked away, which is what I did then. So I had that era in the wilderness from about 18 to until I was almost 30, where I didn't go to church except when I was home with my family, and I married a Jew, to which my mother replied, "Well, at least he's not a Catholic."
So that's when you get
Yeah. I was raised by a very low church Episcopalian. Very adamant Protestants. But then after that failed marriage, I wanted to reclaim my religious heritage, because I tried not being anything except like going out for brunch with my friends on Sunday morning, which was kind of a church. I tried being Jewish. I tried dragging my Jewish husband to the Unitarian Church, which was like not going to church at all to me. And so after we got divorced, I just really wanted to reclaim my religious heritage, and so I started going back to church. And then I met my second husband at church. And the rest is history. And I also connected with your not wanting to drive a long way to church. So I had two requirements when I came to this church. It had to be within 10 minutes of home. It had to have a parking lot. Because we had lived in Evanston for a long time at a church where you had to park on the street, and there was no street parking. So I think those are critical things.
I actually went to a service at, I think it's St. John's on Main Street in Mount Prospect, which is a little bit closer to my house. But they don't have a parking lot, and I'm like, and it was in this winter, and I'm like, I don't think I can do this, and I'm afraid of, I have 2 replaced knees, and I have a bad hip, and I'm like, the whole idea of having to do parking on the street and doing this walk and falling, I don't think so.
Wasn't working. See, the nuts and bolts matter.
Yep, and that is part of it, you know. Yeah.
And this works out especially well because it's next door to the wellness center, and I can go do a workout and then come here.
Another plus, we should put that in our list.
next door to the work.
A little multitasking.
I was relating to the idea of shopping for a church, even though I was raised Episcopalian, because I too spent some years not going to church. My husband was raised Catholic and left the church in his mind long before he formally declared it by marrying me in the Episcopal Church. Because at that time, ancient times ago, if you were a Catholic, got married in another church, everybody was like, it's a huge sin. And they're still friends of his parents. I'm sure think that we've been living in sin for 40-some years. But at any rate, and I looked, but I didn't have the advantage of the internet. I was thinking that's really helpful if you're trying to find something today. I mean, I physically went to a lot of different churches, but it's kind of an interesting experience to go through. You know, when you were raised in the Episcopal Church, and I went to one church and lived in one place forever, and then came here, a different state, to go and visit different churches that were all Episcopalian, but they were very different from each other.
Yeah.
And when I came to St. Simon's, there was just something really warm and welcoming, and, you know, it was like, I didn't have to like analyze it. It was like, okay, this is where I think I need to be.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, if nobody's ever had to go around and look at churches, you know, it's something maybe to do, you know, yeah.
They call it a
Yeah, Samuel was
steeplechase.
talking about that this morning.
Yeah.
What did you say, Ellen?
They call it a steeplechase.
I have never heard that term. Well, it can be very reinforcing to where you are, to go to another church.
Yeah.
You know, like in the summer when we've gone to York County, we've sometimes gone to other churches just, you know, for curiosity's sake. So it's
Oh,
a
yeah.
great little Episcopal church in Fish Creek. But,
Have you been
but,
to the
you
one
know,
in Jacksonport?
Um,
Jacksonport.
no, I don't think I
Saturday
went.
nights, Jacksonport, that's
I
where
don't
you
think
go.
we went to that one. But we went, you know, and it's just, I think it helps you to appreciate where you are, and sometimes it helps you get ideas too. You know?
I admire the fact that you started so young,
Yeah.
concentrating on the Bible and faith. What do you think triggered that? What was driving it?
I mean, it really was so random to a degree. I mean, it was something struck a chord when my youth pastor told us at my freshman year, like, and maybe it was just because, you know, like I was always very curious about the world around me. I still am. I like learning, and you know, I was a firstborn, so I was a very good kid, trying to always be the good kid, you know. So I think a lot of firstborns are. And so because I always had felt sort of spiritual growing up, not like super spiritual, you know, but certainly not a kid who was completely uninterested in God. So when he said, oh, you know, really just made this push to, you guys should be reading the Bible at home. Like if you really believe in this, your faith is something important, you should be getting to know the scriptures. And I was kind of like, yeah. And then when I think I probably started with Matthew, I probably just opened up the first gospel and started going through it. And at the time, like I really, really was kind of impressed by the wisdom of the words. So, and I was always drawn to literature. I was a big reader. So as soon as I started realizing that a lot of these words were very moving to me, either because of the wisdom or the expression of love, then I wanted to read more, and I wanted to get to know more. And then, you know, that's when I started, you know, I joined like a Bible study school once a week, and that was interesting, because it's like me meeting with other kids, doing some kind of study that was interesting. And so the more I enjoyed that, the more I wanted to know more and read it, and, you know. And I think too at the time, like as much as I look back and I say, well, there were like, you know, some negatives that I had to deal with that took me a while to get over. Some of the positives, you know, in my non-denominational groups, when you're singing contemporary songs together that are worship and praise songs, they're fun, they're upbeat, they're inspiring. So it's kind of connected my interest with God to something that, you know, was more fun and upbeat than the service I was going to on Sunday, which, you know, is very, very, very traditional in the Orthodox Church. And then I didn't forsake that either, you know, and at the time I think there was a moment where my youth pastor was concerned, I think, that I was like happy I was doing all this, but then was worried I was probably going to leave the Orthodox Church. and had me read a book actually, which was a really good book, which was about an American guy, I don't remember what his original background was, who ended up converting to Orthodoxy and becoming a priest. And that was actually really good because that book just gave me a lot of information about the history of the Orthodox Church and why certain things are done the way they are. So, you know, I was simultaneously like involved in both of these and getting something different from both of them. But I would say that reading the scripture on my own was really ignited something in me that kind of caused this domino effect of involvement in other areas. Yeah.
How do you find your faith affects your work life?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, on one hand, I wish during the day sometimes that I would remember more frequently to stop and pray when I get stressed out. And I remember times in high school because I was so like almost over involved in this, that I would remember, like I would get stressed out in high school. Of course, like anytime something mildly bad happens, you think it's the end of the world. And I would like pray, and then when it resolved itself, I'd be so thankful, and it was great. I forget to do that sometimes. I should do that anyways now. But I would say that on the way to work, a lot of times I still find different spiritual podcasts, whether it's like the Joel Osteen Sermon of the Week, or whether it's like there's one that's through Ancient Faith Radio, which is Orthodox, where it's a priest that does like literally, it's 10 minutes, but he goes through a verse of the Bible a day, and he goes through books, and it's a great podcast. It gets into historical things in the church. But what I like about that, so I'll do that a couple days a week on the way to work, is that a lot of times listening to that message in the car or something related to that helps remind me to be more patient with my colleagues and my students, to not be judgmental of my own colleagues if we don't agree on a certain issue. So I would say that where my faith intersects with my work is that the more that I try to embrace reminding myself of the tenets of our faith, is that it's about reminding myself to be a better person and being a better person at work, which, can be really hard when you're working with large groups of people, or especially when, like I alluded to, when there's disagreements of either like pedagogy or the way to approach something. I might still at the end of the day think that I'm on the right side of the fence, but it reminds me to not start thinking like I'm superior to other people or behave in a way like that, So that humility of Christ, yeah.
I'm curious as to whether or not you ever tried to convert one of your fundamentalist friends and get them,
That's
and
interesting.
how
It's like
that,
a more moderate stance.
well, to really just to challenge some of the things you were having trouble with. And what was their response?
I'm trying to think. Well, I had, and this is when I was still trying to navigate the sexual orientation thing. And I remember multiple times having this conversation. And, at the time, I didn't know enough about where I stood to make an argument about, those passages in the Bible or that kind of stuff. But I knew enough of the Gospels to be like, certain language, attitudes of judgment would not be things that Jesus would endorse. So I remember having that conversation of like, look, when you use that language or when you talk about that is not, Jesus has told us to love each other. Why would you talk like that? Why would you do that? And I think it depends on the person. I think there were a lot of people that were very loving and open, even if they didn't believe that, that was scientific or that was okay, however you want to word it. But then there were other people who I think were from more ignorant backgrounds. It was very hard to have a dialogue with them because there was a very closed-minded place that they were coming from. And I don't think I've had an opportunity in my more mature life to like sit down and have a larger conversation because I haven't, I didn't keep those contacts over time. So,
Still lots of them out there.
I know, and I haven't had the opportunity to come into
Science
contact with them.
has had to catch up too.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
you're thinking back quite a few years in your young life,
Yeah.
and science is just getting to where we need it to be.
Right, and I think when I was in college, I was like, so if I'm estimating like middle of college, it'd be like 17 years ago. And that was still, where we had professors who would say, science is pretty well established that there is some kind of, gene that would set up a predisposition and that there would be something with the genetics and the first couple years of life, and that's about as much as we know. And that was just a few professors at the time 17 years ago. And that was even still, they were very sure of that background, but it was still a very vague way of stating it, so. yeah.
What do you do? I don't know what you do for.
I teach English at Stevenson High School.
Okay.
Yeah. And I didn't know what I wanted to do when I went to college, so, you know, I did want to be an English major, because I love that. So I went to Northwestern College of Arts and Sciences, so it was very liberal arts-based curriculum, so you had to take 2 classes in every major subject area. So I was definitely taking a lot of various classes, and I think the one that I took at the time, this wasn't the professor, I had a psychology professor who stated that, or maybe it was this time. I took like an evolution versus creationism class in sociology or philosophy, something like that, which was interesting. So, yeah.
I keep hoping, and I don't know what you think, but I keep hoping that being grounded in a one of them in your religion as you grow up, hopefully in
It's the worst experience I've ever had.
a like-thinking religion, open and loving, that would help someone not be pulled off to the extreme. And that the most vulnerable people might be those who either grew up feeling or growing in that extreme environment, or those who had no background. But I don't know if it's true or not statistically, but I keep hoping that for all of these beautiful children that come here, that they will be prepared to follow your path.
Yeah.
You know, to know what is truly true and what is not.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be interested if there were statistics on
Yeah,
that
I
too.
would be too.
And I think my instinct would be the same as yours, that if you've got some kind of grounded background, even if you go through like these floating years, that there are certain things that you won't be swayed by, you know.
Because I would assume that you come from a very loving family.
Yeah.
And that basically your values have been formed by your parents and the people that you know.
Yeah.
And therefore you could be discerning.
Yeah, it did allow me that for sure. And then, like I said, you know, I kind of I'm on one hand at this point, like, I have to stop I can be judgmental sometimes about, you know, the segment that falls into, as adults, allowing themselves to be deluded into some extremist views. But at the other hand, I'll also be defensive of that of that group at times, because if you haven't, you know, interacted with people of, you know, a certain evangelical background who can fall into that camp, sometimes it's very easy to be judgmental of that group, especially if you're coming from a non-Christian perspective and you just see, you know, they're really reaching out and trying to save people and all that. But what I'll say about a lot of the people I interacted with is, even though they had some ignorance about the history of the Bible and the history of certain views, or the idea that, like, you know, just use the evolution thing, the idea that believing in evolution would be a threat to your faith, or that Genesis wasn't written in the original Greek to allow for that, you know, that it's not a literal translation of 7 days, things like that. But I'll also say that, like, a lot of the people that I was interacting with were truly loving people that really wanted to serve others and help people. So they might have had some quirks on the edge of his faith, but there were a lot of loving people too. And I think that if you haven't had that interaction one-on-one, it's easy to not know that and to just like caricature them as this super judgmental segment of Christianity. And there are certainly individuals that may be like that, but as a group, the people I interacted with most of the time were very focused on loving Jesus, how do we worship him, how do we praise, how do we service others, and not, you know, the judgmental sections or the narrow-minded sections were more at the periphery for most of the people that I was with.
You're obviously very serious-minded. What do you do for recreation?
I'm like way too involved. My freshman year in high school, I convinced my mother that like I wanted to do the drill team and I wanted to play tennis, which meant that 2 days a week, I think at least, I had tennis until 5:30, came home to eat dinner, and then she would drive me back at school to do drill team from 6:30 to 9. And I was like, no, I can do this. And so she's like, okay, if you really want to do this. And I was also playing violin in the orchestra. And so I was doing all these things because I wanted to, and I'm still this way now. Every time I talk about a new thing, my husband is just like, okay, are you sure you want to do this? Because are you going to drop something? So like right now, no, it'll be fine. So like right now I'm in French class with adults once a week for fun because I decided after I quit fencing, which I took up like my senior in high school and I did through college and after college. And then I quit fencing like 5 years ago. And so I took up French to fill that space. And then my husband and I watch a lot of TV together. We have certain shows we like to follow. Exercise, yeah. That's pretty much it. Travel, I love travel. Yeah.
So Carly, you're in our Seekers group.
Yes, yeah.
And so you're going to be received, is that correct?
Mhm.
Okay. And will
Yeah.
that be here at St. Simon's?
I
or-
think it's gonna be, because it would have been here at St. Simon's, but I couldn't be here Easter because I had a wedding in New York City. So I think it's gonna be in Chicago, right? Like the
31st?
bishops
At the
coming.
cathedral?
Is it bishop or what?
Yeah.
At the cathedral on the 31st, I believe, it's a
Mhm. So
Saturday.
it's
Oh,
actually gonna
good.
be
So
there,
you'll be
yeah.
with the confirmation.
That'll be kind of fun, yeah.
Or the confirmations.
Okay, cool.
Well, some of them. like-
Some of them, yeah.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
great.
So I think there was a second opportunity where like the bishop or someone is coming here,
Bishop,
except
yeah,
I'm gonna be
June.
out of town
Yeah,
that
June.
weekend in June. Again, for travel, so I go have some fun there.
That's great.
Yeah. My latest thing is I'm doing a 20-month grad school program, so that was another one where my husband was like, he's like, you really love French, and you might have to take a break from French for a while. And I was like, well, we'll see. So, yeah.
Thank you for
Thank
sharing.
you.
your
Thank